Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Roger, and the organizing committee for inviting me. Let's see how this works. These are the disclosures for today. So we kind of all agree that there seems to be a durability issue with EVAR, and probably the first time we noticed that was after the New England Journal of Medicine publication in 2015 from Mark Schermerhorn's group, where late rupture and reintervention was significantly more frequent after endovascular repair. And obviously, after the long-term results of the EVAR-1 trial, we noticed that after about 11 years or so, the all-cause mortality started to get worse after EVAR. Probably more important, after 8 years, the aneurysm-related mortality goes up after EVAR. And if you take 8 years as a starting point, it's actually quite significant. So we know that most common failure mode of EVAR is actually loss of proximal seal. And this is especially seen after implants in attachment zones that are already aneurysmal. So basically a wide neck is a durability issue for EVAR. And that happens to be the case for all different grafts using self-expanding stents. So this is a publication from the GREAT group using excluders, comparing wide necks versus standard necks, and you see a gradual increase in type 1A endoleaks, which is significant, and an increased mortality after a couple of years as well in the wide neck group. This is a study of our own using 3 centers using self-expanding stents, comparing wide necks versus standard necks. And you see that there's far more neck-related events in the wide neck group, and the clinical success is far lower in that group. If you take that more to a global study using the ENGAGE registry, using a self-expanding endurance graft, we basically see the same. The wide necks give you a 3-fold greater increase in type 1A endoleak, a gradual increase in type 1A endoleaks, and a 5-fold greater risk of aneurysm rupture and increased mortality. And there's a very recent systematic review now on the same subject, and you see that wide necks gives you a larger incidence of type 1 endoleak, neck-related adverse events, sac expansion, rupture. All the bad things happen more often in wide neck patients. Our own research showed that the most common failure mode of EVAR in wide necks was loss of proximal seal due to progressive dilatation of the neck. So it's not migration, it is just progressive dilatation. And we actually found a yearly rate of neck dilatation between 4 to 6%. And maybe this continuous outward radial force by self-expandable stent grafts may actually play an important role here. So there's one different graft from the others, and that's the ovation graft. And that has a polymer ring that you fill, and after implantations, there's basically no radial force left on the aneurysm neck. So there's no outward force. And it is studied, and much to my surprise, the ovation shows no dilatation up to 5 years in the neck in the patients that they have treated, very much in contrast to all the, or most of the self-expandable stents. So that gave me an interesting subject. So we thought this is actually a good study subject. And the objective of this study was to determine the impact of polymer sealing on neck-related adverse events by studying the 5-year outcomes of patients treated with the largest ovation device. So we took the group that was most prone for neck dilatation. And the hypothesis was that patients with a wide infrarenal neck can be treated safely and durably with the largest ovation device. So our study group was basically a composition of the patients within a trial, both in the US as in Europe. Most of the trials were done for 5 years. So it's a retrospective analysis of 6 prospectively enrolled studies, almost 1,300 patients, with very much standardized follow-up and a median follow-up of about 3 years, because the small studies were actually a little bit shorter, and it went up to 5 years. So the study group was almost 20%, 242 patients treated with the widest device, the largest one, and the controls were used as the remaining population were used as a control. Looking at baseline characteristics, there was basically, in demographics, no difference between the large group and the normal group. Medical history was about the same, although the large group had a little bit more tobacco use. The aneurysms treated in the large neck group were slightly bigger, about 2 millimeters bigger, and the necks were a little bit shorter, but still with 19 millimeters, a relatively long neck. And obviously, the necks were wider in the wide group. Procedural characteristics, basically no difference, but a bit to my surprise, or actually not really to my surprise, is that the smaller ones were done percutaneously more often than the bigger ones. So if you look at results, mortality, so it's the big group versus the rest of the group. You see no difference in all-cause mortality up to 5 years, no difference in AAA-related mortality. We see no difference in rupture. We see no difference in conversion. There is a difference in type 1A endoleak, but in contrast to all the self-expandable stents, these type 1A endoleaks appeared on the first post-operative CT, the 30-day CT scan, which probably had a lot to do with sizing more than anything else. And as you can see, after that, there was no type 1A endoleak during the next 5 years. Proximal reintervention basically followed that same rule. So after 30 days, basically no reinterventions for proximal reasons. So in conclusion, EVAR using the proximal polymer sealing does not seem to induce neck dilatation like other endografts. And in contrast to self-expandable EVAR devices, patients treated with the largest size do not suffer from more complications compared to the normal diameter devices. So this analysis suggests that Ovation is, or may be, a durable EVAR option even in the worst of our patients with a wide neck. And further investigation, I guess, is needed to understand why Ovation follows a different clinical course. Thank you so much for your attention.